There just can be no sovereign AI with a single vendor.
Welcome to Beyond CUDA. I'm your host, Jeff Tatarchuk, founder of TensorWave, the AMD GPU cloud. Today on the show, we have Keith Strier, who in his 30-year career has moved from advising governments on national AI strategies at EY and Deloitte to building NVIDIA's AI Nations program as vice president of worldwide AI initiatives. There, he helped more than 20 countries stand up sovereign AI infrastructure and policy frameworks. But last year, in 2024, he made the leap from Team Green to Team Red, from NVIDIA to AMD, where he now leads as the SVP of Global AI Markets, giving him truly a rare vantage point into both sides of the GPU divide. Keith, thanks for taking the time to be here, man. Where are you in the world? I know every time I see you on LinkedIn, you're in Dubai, you're in Korea.
Well, you can create this image that you're everywhere on LinkedIn by just posting pictures in a very methodical way. But I'm home today. I do travel a bit. Of course, that's part of the job. But I live in Southern California, Orange County specifically, and I'm very lucky to live in this nice part of the country and joining you from my from my home.
Awesome. Well, glad to have you, man. Well, I want to dive right into it, man. You have a really amazing story of being a consultant for many years, advising companies and enterprises on their technology initiatives. And yeah, I want to dive into what it was like for you being a consultant and making that big pivot in your life, going from a consultant to building inside NVIDIA back in 2018.
I am grateful for my time in the Big Four. I was there, I think, 17 years between Deloitte and then Ernst& and Young. It's a great place to grow up and to launch a career, to become a professional. I didn't think I would leave. I mean, when you make partner and you think of it, it's a long-term commitment. You're very connected to the culture, to your people, and obviously the work that you do. But change is good. Right? And taking calculated risk is the only way to really unlock, like, new frontiers and personal growth and wealth creation and all that good stuff, right? So leaving the Big Four, it was a hard thing to do, but it was sorta like jumping into a cold plunge pool, going to NVIDIA, but you know, it was still fun.
How so? How did you find out about NVIDIA? Did Jensen reach out to you? Did you see an opportunity there? What was the impetus that made
Yeah.
the
It
push?
was no, I mean, Jensen did not reach out to me. So what happened was, uh, I mean, I was already I was the global head of AI at Ernst& and Young, and I was the one that proposed that to the firm and ended up creating and leading that practice in 2017. Uh, and I always loved the Big Four culture, and the work that I was doing, but I did struggle with the pace, to be frank. I mean, the tech sector was a far better fit for my brain. In fact, no, this was, and so here's a really personal story. So in 2000, I made partner in 2007, and in 2008, I was at Deloitte at the time, and I got added to this sort of this early development program where they hire these career coaches and to help young partners. And so I had this, and she was brilliant. This really great. She was like a clinical psychiatrist, and she spent this time studying me and even interviewing my peers and things like that. And she comes back to me after, a certain number of weeks, and we're in this room, and she's pulls out her little report, and she goes, "Well, Keith, I have one question for you." I'm like, "What's that?" "Why are you here?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" Like, I didn't know. I was really confused by the question. She goes, "Well, you're not a good fit for this place. Your personality, it's just not gonna work out." Now, this is not what I wanted to hear as a young partner. I had just signed the partnership agreement. I'd taken this big loan, to buy in. The last thing I wanted to hear is I wasn't a good fit. I mean, like, could you told this to me like 2 years earlier, right? You know? So but as it turns out, she was only half right. So I did stay and I thrived as a partner, and I figured out how to mode match and to make it work. I became the first chief digital officer of Deloitte. I became the first AI leader for EY. So I found my path. But at the same time, I was constantly rubbing elbows and banging into personalities and processes that just wanted to slow me down. And making things work is not should not be your goal in life, right? Just kind of fitting in. It's okay to fit in, but fitting should not be the goal. And I really wanted to break out, make a bigger impact in the world, and I knew I had to go to change that environment. The tech sector, obviously NVIDIA, it's like this constant wave of energy, and you can ride that wave. You can pour your own energy into that wave, and you can make the wave bigger, you can redirect it, it's just a chance to exist and to operate in a different way. So beyond white papers and workshops and all the things that consultants do, I just found this new dynamic really intoxicating, and I remain grateful to Jensen and to NVIDIA for that period of personal growth. But I I mean, let's be clear, it was a brutal first year. It wasn't it was still a hard transition,
Yeah,
for
how
sure.
so? How so? Dive into that, 'cause I'm sure the
Well
transition from consultant to NVIDIA was that, but what were some of the key things that made it
well,
tricky?
look, I mean, NVIDIA is a pretty unique company in terms of the way it operates and the way it's organized, and really they didn't talk that much. They weren't very public about it until recently, and now there's been Jensen's given a lot of interviews and stuff, and so it's a very flat organization. And I came from a very hierarchical organization, right? Consulting, the big four are pretty hierarchical. So there's different levels of status and impact and influence. That doesn't really exist in NVIDIA. It's pretty flat. Also the pace again at in the big four, you talk about things in essentially a year cycle, right? Like, hey, let's make a big decision, let's let that decision play out, and then we'll revisit it in a year. I mean, that's pretty standard, but that is not true. And in the tech sector in general, and based on my experience at NVIDIA, you make decisions, but if the information around, if the world changes, if the circumstances change, you pivot. I mean, you don't wait a year. I mean, obviously you can't afford to. You're publicly traded, you've got responsibilities to your shareholders. So decisions are made much faster. Information is processed in more in real time. And I wasn't prepared for that, but I obviously loved it. I embraced it. It was a good fit for me. But that was still hard because you come in with let me say it this way. All the things that I learned over 15 years or so to be successful in the consulting world, all the behaviors and the assumptions that kind of make it work in that environment, I kind of had to throw them away. You have to kind of hit reset and rebuild your work style and rebuild what your mental model of what is good in this new environment, and that just takes time. And Jensen was all too happy to oblige in making that harder than it had to be because that's who he is, and that's fine. I mean, you got to take the whole experience in, and that was that. I mean, again, everyone has their own unique experience. I mean, colleagues that were joining NVIDIA from other tech firms had a much easier transition. Coming in from consulting was harder. I'm pretty sure that not only I'm pretty sure I was the only ex Big Four partner ever hired in to NVIDIA as a VP, and I mean, I don't know that there's anyone there left. So I might be the only ex Big Four partner who ever worked at NVIDIA. I don't know. It's hard to say, but I'm pretty sure that's true. There are other people from consulting there, but not
Of
partners.
course. Of
Not partners.
course.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
Keith, one of the things I wanna double click on is
Yeah.
you mentioned you started your AI initiative at EY in
Yeah.
2017,
Yeah.
before the big wave. I mean, everybody
Sure.
was
Sure.
talking about it. We knew that a lot of researchers were working on projects.
Yeah.
What were you seeing back in 2017 that you knew that this was going to be something that was going to take off and dominate technology?
Sure, sure. Yeah, it was so here's how it worked out for me. So, look, before 2016, straight out, I was not thinking about artificial intelligence. This was not on my radar. And I'm surrounded by people. I was at NVIDIA and I am again at AMD, surrounded by people that have been focused on this for many, many years. Far, far longer than I have. But that's just not true for me. So before 2016, I hadn't really thought about it. I was very focused on technology. I had been certainly on the cutting edge of technology, both in the healthcare industry where I had spent a lot of time in my consulting days, and then eventually in digital. And I have a pretty, my own sort of unique story on sort of the enterprise digital transformation era. And I was one of the first global chief digital officers at Deloitte, and I saw the opportunity around the iPad very early, and ended up creating some of the first enterprise apps on that, and ultimately one of the first enterprise app stores and all that kind of stuff. But this was all unrelated to AI. This was classical technology transformation and ultimately digital transformation, but not AI. So I was doing all those things, and in 2016, a few things happened. One, externally, the you know the the world started to take AI very seriously in 2016. Things that happened before that, right? I mean, you had the great year, 2012, right? I mean, that convergence of AlexNet and ImageNet and GPUs and all these amazing sort of milestones, right? Breakthroughs that happened in 2012, and then every year thereafter, there was increasing amounts of breakthroughs. But really, it didn't sort of hit the mainstream media. The mainstream mindset really started in 2016 at the World Economic Forum in Davos in January 2016 when they started to really talk about AI when it started to become something that the world was seeing as not just experimental technology that's done in labs and universities, but hey, this is actually starting to get some commercial relevance. It's starting to gel. And I think that's when they coined the term the fourth industrial revolution, and AI was one of the defining technologies of that, right? Not the only one. So that was a really powerful year, right? And you also have the now famous contest between Google with their AlphaGo platform and Lee Sodal and beating him in Go, and so you have all these things sort of happen in 2016. That put it on my radar, honestly. And at that time, I was doing digital transformation consulting work, and one of my clients was the Canadian Blood Services, which was basically the Red Cross of Canada, and I was helping their digital transformation when this happened, and I said, it looks like AI is going to be one of the new pillars of digital transformation. We should start looking at that as maybe a tool for you, along with other things. And so this was kind of the beginning of my journey. And by the end of 2016, I was absolutely convinced this was going to change the world. And I started trying to convince my colleagues it was going to change the world. And look, I wasn't the first to see it, but I certainly at that time within my environment, it was still very early, and the firm agreed eventually, and then we launched the practice. So again, I don't know, I was far from the first person to get it, but I made the pivot in my career in 2016 to focus on artificial intelligence as a strategic lever for transformation. And then at that time was also when countries started to do the same thing, right? The very first national AI strategy showed up in 2017. And as a leader at Ernst& and Young, I decided to lean in on that, and I started to talk to countries about how I could help them, and I ended up becoming one of the first external consultants to countries on this topic, and that's when I actually landed the deal to advise both the island of Malta and the country of Estonia on their national AI strategies, and that was an amazing opportunity to really get in. Now, because of that work, I got some sort of press, some prestige. I actually was written up in an article in December of 2018 in the Wall Street Journal, along with the CIO of Estonia at the time. And I think that kind of created a little bit of momentum around the work that I was doing. And frankly, I ended up meeting with not Jensen, but his number two guy, Jay, who's still there, and he's a great guy. And I ended up sitting down with him, and he said, "Look, we're looking for someone just like you." He goes, "We actually we got this amazing idea called AI Nations," and they'd already launched that. It wasn't my idea. He said, "But we're kind of having trouble kind of getting traction. We're not sure how to implement it. Could you come over and join the company and help us create momentum around serving as the national AI partners for countries?" I mean, that's basically how it happened.
Interesting. How when you went to NVIDIA, how was NVIDIA viewing AI back in 2018? Right then it seemed like there was a lot of focus on, providing just infrastructure, providing GPUs, and what were they thinking back in 2018 when it came to AI? Since the big tidal wave of AI really took off back in 2022 when ChatGPT 3 came on the market. How are they viewing it, and how are they preparing themselves, or did they even know or expect the ChatGPT moment to happen?
Well, I mean, first off, I mean, NVIDIA was involved in OpenAI since the beginning, right? I mean, I don't know, if anyone no one fully knew what was going to happen, right? So no, I think that took everyone by surprise. But ChatGPT was not a surprise. There were people at NVIDIA involved with that project from essentially day one. I mean, there's a famous picture on the internet, I think, of Jensen giving that sort of first DGX1 to Sam Altman, right? So very much involved, but it's very clear that when ChatGPT hit, and let me back up, and all the work done, right, between 2000 whenever to 2022. I mean, that was largely in preparation for what NVIDIA believed would be. There would be a moment. I don't think anyone knew what that moment would be, but there would come this inflection moment when AI would take off. And so, I think it's safe to say, yeah, I mean, largely the company was preparing, for that. But no, I don't think anyone knew. So when it hit in November, certainly I didn't anticipate it. When it hit in November of 2022, sorry, a few weeks later, 2 weeks later, after ChatGPT came out, so very shortly thereafter, I happened to be at this meeting in the Canary Islands called the OECD Digital Ministerial, which happens every few years with all the digital ministers and leaders of Europe. And It was really fascinating because this is all they wanna talk about. I mean, ChatGPT had created an absolute fascination. It had really made an impact on all the leaders across Europe. So they were we talked about it constantly. And when I came back, I sent a memo out to the leadership team at the time and said, this might be bigger than we're thinking. I mean, I don't have visibility to everyone in the world and every CEO in every industry, but I can tell you, I just spent 2 days with the digital ministers of Europe, and this is all they want to talk about. I think this is maybe bigger than we thought, and everyone started to get the same feeling, and by the end of January, I think, early February, it was very clear. So it took, like, another month or 2, it was very clear that this was the iPhone moment, right, of AI, which is what Jensen's comment was, and because NVIDIA is so agile and it's set up in this way to move fast, they did. They pivoted very quickly, and suddenly this was the generative AI became, not just a focus, but it became, essentially the singular focus of the company.
Yeah, I remember hearing a story from someone, I forget who, about that pivot moment where Jensen called everybody together and said, "This is the path. We're focusing on this specific thing." Do you remember that day and that
Yeah,
moment?
well, I do. It wasn't I look, if there might have been a meeting and I wasn't in the meeting, but I do remember the email.
Mm.
And he definitely sent a message out, and it wasn't that many people. There was maybe, I don't know, 8 or 9 people in the message, but he said it very clearly. He said, actually, he had just come back from a trip, I believe, in Sweden, and he had spent some time with the CEOs of Sweden, and like my experience he's like, this is all they want to talk about. And so I think he absolutely saw it and said very quickly, like, immediately, starting tomorrow morning, we're gonna pivot. And again, that's part of the frankly, the organizational design of the company is the ability to respond quickly and that kind of thing. So they did, again, and it happened pretty fast.
Yeah. And from that moment, what was it like to go from, you guys were working on something to all of a sudden the fire hose is turned on, and then you can't get any GPUs anywhere. There's this huge supply constraint, 9 to 12-month backlogs, and
Yeah, I mean, that took time, right? But that took time, but what happened pretty quickly, I mean, within a few months, you know well, let me go back. So if you go back, I joined in 2019. Between 2019 and 2022, I mean, I had signed 20 to 30 sort of partnerships across the world with nations. So we had a lot of engagement. I mean, from small countries like Serbia to bigger countries
who are buying GPUs from you and
well, not
setting up a data center?
necessarily. No, no, not necessarily. They were signing partnership agreements. They wanted to work with NVIDIA. They recognized that compute was becoming more important, but no, they were not all writing checks. Very few of them were, in fact. They were willing to sign an MOU, but not willing to sign a purchase order. So that was, so they recognized they needed to go in this direction. There was momentum building, there was awareness, but there wasn't a lot of spending yet. It was smaller than it should have been, right? The urgency wasn't there yet. So the conditions were set, right, for this explosive demand, but it took ChatGPT to blow the doors off the hinge, to light the match, right? And so the relationships were there, the conversations were there, and also we had done a lot of work to educate the countries on the broader needs to invest in your whole ecosystem, not just obviously GPUs, but the things around the GPUs and your local AI ecosystem and other kinds of things. And others had done that too. I mean, the World Economic Forum had, a lot of the OECD and a lot of organizations have leaned in at this point. But now you've got these conditions, and then the match is lit. Within a few months, there's just a mad dash by countries, a real sense of urgency, and I think it unfold. I mean, it's impossible to characterize everyone like they all had one thought process, right? But I think basically it went like this. You know, on Monday, you didn't think AI was a big deal, and, like, it's kind of interesting, right? But by Tuesday, you're thinking, "Holy cow, this is actually happening." Like, I'm playing with this thing called ChatGPT. This kinda feels real. This feels like the future has arrived, and I'm getting a glimpse of it, right? And Aaron Levy, the CEO of Box, he also had this famous quote that, ChatGPT felt like that rare moment when you saw a glance of the future, and it was right there. Right? So that's Tuesday. By Wednesday, you woke up in a cold sweat and you thought, "Wait a second. Can we do this here? Do we have the ability to create this technology here? This feels like existential for our country." And so as the week progressed, I think world leaders came to the realization this wasn't only amazing technology powered by GPUs, although honestly at that moment they probably didn't know that there were any GPUs involved. But but that what if we don't have this at our home? What if we can't build this? What if, we lose access to this? This feels like this might be critical to the future of our country. So, it didn't take very long for countries to suddenly realize they needed to scale up. And so yes, within a few months, the conversations went from it's nice to be partners with you to how quickly can you ship GPs? And I don't want to name specific countries, but there were some countries that like really got very worried. One country, kind of insisted that we sign a letter of intent, like, immediately, that basically we're like, we promised to send them as many GPUs as they wanted or something like that. Of course, we're like, "Well, we'll do our best." I mean, I don't know that, we could guarantee that, but the answer was the first person, as you submit your PO, we'll obviously do our best to fulfill them. And obviously, the hyperscalers also reacted the way they did, and certainly the hyperscalers bought more than countries, but across the world, obviously, the revenues exploded, and it now it became an issue of just doing it well and delivering it and that kind of thing. Yeah, so 2023 was obviously the year that sovereign AI went from a concept to something that people talked about as a policy idea to driving procurements and becoming part of sort of the new national priorities, of the nation. So that really wasn't a thing before 2023.
And how did NVIDIA, decide where the chip allocations were going to at that time? Where there's the hyperscalers, sovereign countries, big tech companies. How did he
Look, I wasn't part of any private conversations on, where they made allocations like that. I think it was very methodical. I mean, honestly, the chips, the orders would come in and they would try to fulfill them. I mean, there were times when we couldn't fulfill them and we would have to make some reductions. Hey, look, you want X and we're going to be able to give you Y. But I didn't, those decisions were made, in a different room than I was in. But by and large, I think NVIDIA did a really good job of dealing with the tremendous supply chain strain and obviously the surge in demand. And I think the revenues reflected that, obviously. So I'm sure it was very, very difficult. Coming out of COVID, obviously there were still a lot of breakages in the supply chain and things. But actually, COVID actually also prepared the supply chain in a sense. So it might good news, bad news thing. The as far as who got what, I think it was. I don't think it was very complicated. I don't believe that any favorites were picked. I mean, clearly, there was a desire to fulfill as many orders as possible, and in some cases, honestly, people wanted the technology, and this is true today, by the way. Has not changed. Countries want the technology, but they're not ready for it. This is a very dynamic, right? So you have the vision, you may have the budget, you have the appetite, but turns out you don't have the data center for it, or you don't have the people to work in the data center, or you don't have other things. And so actually there is a difference between wanting it and being able to absorb it. That was totally clear on day one, but over time, so very clearly the commercial hyperscalers and eventually the core weaves, they were able to take this technology in a lot faster. Uh, from a country perspective, and the partners with the countries, because a lot of the quote unquote sovereign AI stuff is really just private sector deals. But there were a lot of entities whose appetite for GPUs exceeded their ability to take them. And so data center readiness emerged as one of the key bottlenecks, even more so, I think, than the supply chain.
Yeah. Now from the time of 2022 when the moment started through 2024, um, what were you most excited about during that time seeing happening within NVIDIA and the conversations you were having?
Yeah, I mean, I was excited to see this idea come to life because I truly believed that sovereign look, I wasn't focused just because this was a sales opportunity. There's sort of you want to do your job and you want to do it really, really well because you've got a work ethic and you have an obligation to your company and your employer, but you also feel a bit of a mission, right? You feel kind of purpose driven. And and the purpose part of for me was that not only did I have the opportunity to help ship GPUs, that's great. But the purpose part was I had a chance to actually create the infrastructure that would drive economies forward. I mean, like, not you don't always get that chance in life where you're not just part of like some big deals and a company whose stock price is going up. Like that's great. But you're also part of something where you're building the infrastructure of the future quite literally across the world. And this is going to change the trajectory of nations. I mean, literally. I mean, I'm not trying to be overly dramatic, but happens to be true, right? I mean, this is about unlocking the potential of economies. It's about making economies more prosperous, more secure, about giving, researchers and scientists and entrepreneurs and developers a chance to realize their potential. I mean, this is, this is actually kind of amazing stuff to be a part of. And so I was excited to see that happen, right? That what started out as some simple MOUs and really interesting conversations turned into, hundreds of billions of dollars of investment, creating this new infrastructure that's going to drive the future. I mean, that's I feel incredibly fortunate to have been a part of that, play any role in that. And yeah, so and of course it's not over, right? I mean, we're at the very early days of this tsunami of excitement. So it's not like, "Oh, wow, I was part of that, now I'm looking for my next thing." I mean, I left NVIDIA and came to AMD to continue that mission, quite frankly, and to keep building infrastructure and make it accessible to the world, and to help, really help everybody gain access to this technology in the most innovative, competitive way. And so, yeah, so that's where it started, and that's where it keeps going.
I like it, man. Now, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about, everybody talks about how NVIDIA has this moat. A lot of people say it's CUDA. They might think it's something else, but NVIDIA, Jensen has done a lot. That's the whole reason why we're doing this podcast is to, we tip our hat to what Jensen has done over the last 30 years to build what he's built with NVIDIA, built with CUDA, built up this ecosystem. But we're seeing that the world cannot be sustainable if there's just one player, one vendor in the market. But yet there are a lot of people who are trying to overcome that moat, whether it's Intel or AMD or some of these other chip providers, and they keep saying that NVIDIA has this solid moat. What do you think this moat that NVIDIA has?
Yeah. So fundamentally, NVIDIA's position is very strong. It's difficult to attack because they saw it first, right? I mean, you can't deny that. They started to build the software stacks and the libraries and the commercial ecosystems and the go-to-market relationships to invest in the developer communities and the training platforms that fuel those and the co-innovation relationships with universities and all that stuff. They started to build that years and years and years ago, and you that to me, that's the moat, right? It isn't so much a piece of software or CUDA as this development platform. That's easy to say, and it's kind of simplifies the conversation, but it belies the complexity of what they've put together. And frankly, NVIDIA's market success, it reflects, this visionary position, and there's no denying it, right? But that advantage, so they have that true market sort of leadership position, but is it a lasting advantage, right? That's the question,
That
right? I
is the
mean,
question.
that's the question. So they've built up this impressive market position, and they gave the world this computing stack that ignited the modern era of AI. There's no question, right? But at the same time, markets evolve. Competition is good, and the opportunity ahead of us is so profound. There's not only room for competition like AMD. There's actually an imperative to have it, right? And you kind of touched on it, right? I mean, the world really needs AMD and its partners and its ecosystems to bring balance and resilience and innovation and security to this collective AI future that we're going to have. And I it's really not a hard conversation to have with customers, whether it's CTOs at big companies or ministers of IT or even, prime ministers. I mean, nobody wants to be locked into a single company, and no one believes that all the world's AI should run on a single platform. It's just it actually, I mean, if you think about it, it's a terrible idea, right? I mean, it's the very definition of a single point of failure, right? And the only one that wants this is NVIDIA, right? And they're 100% committed to making sure that, there's only one option, but that's not where the world needs to go. And you think of a metaphor. Think of the cloud market, right? I mean, AWS clearly pioneered the modern cloud era, right? I mean, there's this epic story of the engineer that pitched Jeff Bezos on this idea of, hey, we should sell some extra cloud capacity, create this thing called the cloud. We have extra computing. Why not? I mean, however it started, right? I mean, but all the, and eventually, and they had a market advantage. They had dominant market share, but eventually, Google and Microsoft and Oracle and others, have leveled it out. And if all the world's data and applications sat in one cloud, that would just be a terrible idea for the world, right? And so I think the gold standard today is to have deals and to work with all the hyperscalers, even private, smaller clouds. A single global cloud is just doesn't make sense. And the same goes. So, NVIDIA was the first with a complete vision for AI infrastructure, but look, it does take time not only to design and build great chips, but to deliver a complete AI computing platform, to put them into clouds, to make them accessible and reliable and scalable. It also takes time to build these ecosystems and these developer communities, but you can close that gap. Not in decades or even really years, but you can close that gap, in quarters. And so I think it's very clear to everybody that the world needs silicon diversity, that this is critical to the future of nations and stable economies, and there just can be no sovereign AI with a single vendor. So I feel very comfortable that AMD has not only a role to play, but a critical role to play in the future, along with its partners, and that CUDA has a role to play too. But there will be other alternatives to CUDA, like the ROCm platform, and there will be other sort of approaches and other ecosystems, and altogether, that's a good thing.
That's right. When it comes to that moat that was created, obviously Jensen can't have dominance on the entire thing. Where do you see the opportunity or the entry point that if somebody, a provider outside of that ecosystem,
Yeah.
namely AMD,
Yep.
would and slash should focus on something, where do you see that opportunity and where
Yeah,
do you feel
well
like
well, look, these are complex technologies and you're applying them to complex situations, and so it isn't usually one thing, right? I mean, it's an intersection of the silicon itself, right? I mean, AMD has some actual really great advantages in terms of its chiplet architecture, its high bandwidth memory, the way it was designed. So that's designed and manufactured. So you've got the silicon, but then you combine that with the software and actually the ROCm platform that AMD has and that is using across all of its silicone. It is we've leaned in more to an open architecture, an open system, community driven. It's almost the polar opposite of NVIDIA's CUDA platform, and this is very consistent where the world wants to go. It's very consistent with what other countries want to go. So, and again, it's not a matter of not using CUDA; it's a matter of using CUDA and ROCm. It's about having that balance and that choice in the market, right? So, it's about having Android and iOS and, you can pick your favorite metaphor, but and when people do ask, "Well, what's better about your system or how are you gonna beat them?" I understand the question, I do, but I also think to myself, when you think of the cloud, right, and you think of Microsoft, Google, and AWS, does anyone ask who has a better cloud? I mean, at this point, I mean, does anyone care? Is there even possible to say this cloud's better than that cloud? I mean, at this point, they're all world class. They're all useful. They all add value in different ways. They do have different at the margins or at the edges. They have different services or some different capabilities or different interface and other things. They also have different pricing structures and different total cost of ownership. But fundamentally, technology is pretty similar, right? And I think that I think where we're going to go with computing is you're going to see differences. Again, we'll have differences in our design and architecture. They'll have differences in theirs. We'll configure our systems differently and we'll wrap them with different software stacks. But ultimately, AI computing by itself will start to level out. I think not commoditized, by the way, because I think it's still going to be a finite and complex technology that demands a premium. But I think you won't really be you'll lean into Nvidia or you'll lean into AMD not just because one has a better chip or the other chip, but because of the whole proposition, right? Like you like the AMD software stack, you like the AMD people, you like working with AMD, you like their business model, their operating model, and it's kind of all those things put together. And I think that and others will lean in other directions, and that's okay, right? I mean, I think it's not going to come down to a single crack in the moat or one thing here or there. But I think altogether, I think AMD just brings a different proposition to the market. And when people start working with us, they feel that, and we don't really have trouble retaining customers, right? I mean, we're very, very high retention rate. So I think the market's gonna prove that out.
I see it. I want to take a quick step back about your transition from NVIDIA to AMD. It's not a light transition. What was that like for you? What was the process that went down for you to make that decision? It's a big bet to go from you know holding being on one rocket ship that everybody's seeing, and then jumping off to Team Red, where it's like, well, why would you go from the number one player to
Yeah, the
team
number
number
2.
two in line?
it was a very personal decision. I was very proud of the work that I did there, and I still have a great deal of respect for NVIDIA and its leaders and my former colleagues. Truly, a great deal of respect. And I expect that NVIDIA will continue to be, a very successful market leading company. And that's a good thing for the world. So, I don't expect or wish anything differently. But this market is so big and the opportunity is so profound. I do feel that NVIDIA's focus and its operating model was not necessarily looking into every segment of the market and necessarily reaching across the world in the same way that I wanted to. And so when I had the opportunity to jump from NVIDIA to AMD, a good part of my motivation was not just because I wanted to continue my mission, so that was one part of it, but I also want to do things I couldn't do, frankly, at NVIDIA. And I got to be careful; I can't reveal all my secrets. But what I will say is that Lisa, as the CEO, Lisa Su is this amazing CEO that sets the tone for the company. She's unique in being both a visionary and a very dignified and gracious professional, and she creates an operating culture that's heavily focused on execution. I mean, really, AMD is brilliant at many things, and execution is one of them. But she also creates this deep, deep partnering culture. In fact, you look at the motto; it's "Together we advance," right? And those words are we live them. They're deep in the DNA. I would say, objectively, that's not the culture at NVIDIA. It's just, it's a different culture. It's an
Yeah, I was gonna
great.
ask, what are the stark contrasts between the culture of
I
NVIDIA and
mean, it's what I would say is that NVIDIA is singularly focused on, we have a vision for the future, and we want people to come along with us, and we want you to implement our vision, and we don't really want to support different versions of that, and that's their choice. It's like some other companies that that develop these very vertically integrated stacks. And look, you don't have to go with us, but if you go with us, you're going to have to do it this way. I think AMD is a little bit more about, we want to listen to our customer, we want to listen to the market. We think that flexibility and agility and openness and transparency might be better for us, and a good alternative to this other approach. And so I don't know that AMD chose to do that because Nvidia didn't, but that's just naturally where they are. And these two cultures and these two business models, people come to me and they do say, we really like working with AMD. We really love your team. And I didn't really get that too much in my last job. So, people were excited about the technology and people were excited about the future it enabled, but less so maybe about the company. That was my personal experience. I'm not saying others don't have a different one, but I do think there's an important role for AMD to play because of that.
That's right. What are you excited about with the success and the conversations you're now having with sovereign AI? And where do you see the trajectory and where some of these countries are going and who you're working with and some of the opportunities at hand, especially when it comes to your work with AMD?
Yeah, well, the again, this you have this like explosion of interest in the spring of 2023 following ChatGPT. And I do think of the world as like pre-ChatGPT and post-ChatGPT, right? So post-ChatGPT, you have this explosion. But that was like sovereign AI 1.0. And in sovereign AI 1.0, there was basically just recognition that this is important and we have to lean in and we have to invest. Now we're entering sort of sovereign AI 2.0. Now, when I say that, I don't mean every country all at once. There are plenty of countries that are still figuring it out and still doing sort of the 1.0 thing. But you have some countries like Saudi Arabia, like Canada, like India, like South Korea, that are kind of evolving to this 2.0 stage where, it's not good enough we just buy infrastructure or buy GPUs. We actually have to be more advanced, more sophisticated than that. We have to create public-private partnerships, deeper partnerships. We have to explore novel sort of structures, joint ventures, and we have to make sure that we're not just building computing clusters, but we're bringing compute capacity to the country. And so, I see this evolution of thinking, and and that's really great for AMD because AMD, not only is AMD really well regarded in terms of our compute stack, but we actually have the widest portfolio of silicon. Right? There's CPUs and GPUs and FPGAs and APUs, and so we have this really wide portfolio of silicon that stretches from the cloud to the edge to AI PCs, up to satellites in space. And when you think of computing, you have to think beyond just one computer in one data center. You do have to think about both large and small AI clusters. You have to think about public and private clouds. You have to think about commercial clouds and classified clouds. You have to think about AI PCs as well as other things. And so I think this is where governments. In fact, I have one meaningful conversation in Europe that's about they're thinking about procuring 1 million AI PCs. for all the students in their country, because that would really reduce the cost of training on the cloud and give them a lot of computing power right there at home. I think it's maturing, it's getting more sophisticated, and that's great for AMD because that plays into our strengths, open ecosystems, full spectrum silicone, great partnering culture. This is a good fit for us, and so I think we'll do very, very well in this going
I
forward.
love it. Yeah, that's why we were bullish on AMD and decided to go all in because of the diversity of their silicon stack, and we had the experience with FPGAs previously. Um, Beyond CUDA, when you think of Beyond CUDA, what comes to mind?
Yeah, well, it's again, it just ties back to the whole conversation we've had. This is not about painting any one organization or technology bad. It's just about understanding that you have to go beyond. You have to create competition. You have to create innovation. It's very risky and non-resilient to stick with one thing. And so, as great as NVIDIA may or may not be, and as much as energy and money they've poured into CUDA, it is ultimately one stack. And you will always have more innovation when you have options. You will always have more innovation when you have competition. So having the ROCm stack and the thousands of engineers that are leaning into that, and the community that's providing updates, and the way in which it's being pulled and pushed in different directions, that's really good for the world. And one of the most powerful computers in the world is the Lumi supercomputer in Finland, and I was in Helsinki recently with the professionals that work around Lumi, and they're like, "We love ROCm." Most of the data scientists in Finland, work on the Lumi supercomputer, and that's all based on ROCm. And they're accelerating unbelievable models, both large and small, at the cutting edge of science. It's including on Frontier and El Capitan, the two biggest computers in the United States, also all running on ROCm. So we know that there's this tremendous opportunity to take that software to the next level, to keep investing in it, keep making it, keep building the libraries, building out all the tools and all the extensions that people need and want. So this is just part of the journey that we're on, and everyone wants that. So it's not like we have to push it on anybody. It's not like we have to promote it or sell it at all. People come to us and saying, "We want more. Can you do more with Rockham? Can you?" We have a long list of things people want, and so we're just racing to give them what they want. We don't have to spend any time coming up with clever new features or tools. The community constantly gets this feedback, and some things they love, some things they don't, so we fix it. But it is very much driven by the end users, and that's a good thing, right? And that's a good thing.
Exactly. Well, Keith, thank you for your time. Thank you for your work. Thank you for what you've done for the GPU economy, for what you've done for AI, and what you're doing for the US and the nations all across the world, and for the work you're doing for AMD. And thank you for being on the show.
Oh, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me. And again, it's my honor to do this kind of stuff, right? It's part of my purpose, and I feel really
Awesome.
lucky. Thanks, pal.